My name is Gary Whitehouse, and I'm reviewing Lean on Pete by Willy Vlautin. Due to a technical malfunction, this is a re-recording of the original podcast. Lean on Pete is a novel about a neglected teenage boy living in Portland, the racehorse he adopts as his friend, and their cross-country journey in search of a safe home. Willy Vlautin, who wrote Lean on Pete, is a Portland-based writer and musician. The music that was playing when you entered was written and performed by Willie and another Portland musician, a pedal steel guitarist named Paul Brainerd. It was released on CD as a soundtrack to Vlautin's previous novel, Northline. I first came to know of Willie through his band, which is called Richmond Fontaine. The band has been together since 1994 and has released 8 or 10 CDs since 1996. Richmond Fontaine plays rock music with a strong country influence, and many of the songs are mini short stories in the vein of those that appear in Vlautin's books. They're about people who live on the margins of society here in the western United States. Gamblers, drifters, the working poor, and people who are buffaloed by the situations that face them in the course of everyday life. Real people, in other words. Like many writers, Vlautin draws on his own experiences for many of the characters and situations he writes about, both in his songs and his novels. One example is a song titled "Two Alone." When I saw Richmond Fontaine in performance in Portland last month, Willie said this song was almost entirely autobiographical, based on his own experiences when he first moved to Oregon and was working at a trucking company in North Portland. The first 2 verses go like this. Oh, I'd get off work, but I wouldn't go home. I worked with nothing but old men, so I'd drink 40s in my car alone. I'd park down the street and get loaded enough so I could sleep. And in the morning I'd go home, and she'd be up all night and crying alone, watching a credit card TV and holding a credit card phone, sitting on a credit card couch, still in her mom's beat-up and ugly robe. Willy Vlautin grew up in Reno. I'm going to guess that he is about 40. Lean on Pete is Willie's 3rd novel. The first was The Motel Life, published in 2006. It is about 2 down-and-out brothers living in Reno. It is being made into a movie whose cast includes Dakota Fanning and Chris Christopherson, scheduled for release in 2012. His second book was Northline, about a young woman who flees an abusive relationship in Las Vegas, where she lives, and begins to discover what she is made of when she winds up in Reno, having to support herself and live by her own wits. Vlautin has also written some short stories, including one, A Jockey's Christmas, that he released as a spoken-word CD in 2009. It's about a washed-up jockey who can't stop drinking and can't get his weight down enough to continue racing. He goes to Las Vegas for the holidays, and things go from bad to worse. I haven't listened to it or read it, but I'm told that, being a Christmas tale, it has a redemptive ending of sorts. Not all of Willie's stories do. The writer Vlautin is most often compared to is Raymond Carver, and Vlautin himself in interviews has cited Carver as well as Steinbeck, William Kennedy, and others as influences. He writes in a hyper-realistic style with stark, unembellished prose. You'd be hard-pressed to find many adjectives in one of Willy Vlautin's books. Okay, enough background. On to the book at hand, Lean on Pete. But first, how many of you have ever been to a horse race? I ask because much of this book takes place at a horse racing track, and I found the limited experience I have of horse racing helped me to visualize the action. I've only been to the races a handful of times, all of them at a little tiny track at the fairgrounds in Lakeview, Oregon. I was working at the newspaper there during the summer while I was going to the University of Oregon in the mid-1970s. The editor sent me out to take pictures at the meet, which was on a Saturday night and Sunday afternoon. The first race was a short one, only about 3/4 of the track's length. I remember being surprised by that. What, they don't use the whole track? There was one spot where you could get right up next to the track with nothing but a chain-link fence separating you from it, and being 19 and hoping to get some good pictures, that's where I was when that group of 1,000-pound horses came pounding by, running as fast as they could go. They shook the earth and raised a huge ruckus and threw a cloud of dust and dirt clods and small rocks every which way as they went by, much too fast for a mere mortal to photograph. Once I cleaned the dirt off my glasses and out of my hair, I had a lot of it then, I figured out how to position myself somewhere else to get a usable photograph that ran in the paper the next week. What my editor really wanted me to get was the winner's circle pictures. That's where the horse's owner and trainer and jockey pose with the flower-bedecked horse for one quick snap, with everybody but the horse smiling, before they let the horse go out and walk off the race. I got those pictures too, but that was the boring part of the meet. There isn't much of that winner's circle stuff in Lean on Pete. This book isn't about the winners. Lean on Pete is the story of Charlie Thompson. When the story opens, Charlie is 15, living in a down-at-its-heels neighborhood in North Portland, a little north and west of Portland Meadows, the horse racing track that was built in 1933. The story is told in first person, in the past tense, so we see and learn everything about the story through the eyes of Charlie, who is usually a reliable narrator. He tells us pretty much everything he sees and does, but he doesn't always understand the things he sees as well as his adult readers do. I will give you an example from the beginning of the book. When I woke up that morning, it was still pretty early. Summer had just begun, and from where I lay in my sleeping bag, I could see out the window. There were hardly any clouds, and the sky was clear and blue. I looked at the Polaroid I had taped to the wall next to where I slept. It shows my aunt and me sitting by a river. She has on a swimsuit. She's my dad's sister, and she looks like him, with black hair and blue eyes, and she's really thin. In the photo, she's holding a can of soda and smiling as I sit next to her. She has her arm around me. Her hair's wet, and I'm smiling. That was when we all lived in Wyoming. But it had been 4 years since I'd seen her, and I didn't even know where she lived anymore. My dad and I had just moved to Portland, Oregon, and we'd been there for a week. We didn't know anybody. 2 days before my school year was done, we packed the truck and moved out from Spokane. We brought our kitchen table and 4 chairs, dishes and pots and pans, our clothes and TV, and my dad's bed. We left all the rest. The house we rented had 2 bedrooms. There was a kitchen with an electric stove and a fridge, and there was another room that was empty except for a TV we set on a chair. There was a bathroom that had a tub, sink, and toilet, and there was a back room where you could store things and where there was plumbing and electricity so you could put in a washer and dryer if you had them. Our place was in a neighborhood of small, run-down houses next to a trailer park. The houses were built in the 40s. It was called Delta Park. The streets had trees lining them, and we had a backyard. Since it was a real house, my dad promised we'd get a barbecue and then a dog. I didn't care about the barbecue, but I really wanted a dog and hoped this time I would get one. I lay there for a while longer and tried to go back to sleep, but I couldn't, so I got up. I put on a pair of shorts and a flannel shirt and my running shoes. It was Saturday, and most of the cars in the neighborhood were still parked in front of their houses when I left and started jogging down the street. So that's Charlie, living in a pretty much empty house, sleeping on the floor in a sleeping bag, with one of his only possessions, a picture of his aunt and him, taped on the wall by his sleeping bag. They left their last home with few possessions, probably in the middle of the night. His dad has promised him a dog before, probably more than once. Charlie is ready to start his sophomore year of high school and hopes to play football, even though he's not very big. We get an early indication of how motivated and self-reliant Charlie is when he goes running every morning, even with nobody nagging him to do it. And nobody is going to nag Charlie, because Charlie is pretty much on his own, it turns out. His dad is none too reliable, and not just at fulfilling his promises to get Charlie a dog. He's working the night shift at a trucking company and only comes home a couple of times a week. When the refrigerator gets empty, Charlie is forced to shoplift food. We're never told exactly what Charlie's dad is doing when he doesn't come home between shifts, but we can guess. He's either out drinking with his co-workers or sleeping with the girlfriend of one of them. He even brings her home once, and she stands in the kitchen in her underwear and cooks breakfast for Charlie. It's early on in the book when we first hear Charlie say something that he repeats again and again throughout the book. Any of you who have ever had a teenager in the house will certainly identify with it. When someone asks Charlie if he is hungry, he invariably replies, "I'm always hungry." Sometimes it's funny, and sometimes it isn't. Charlie's first morning run takes him by Portland Meadows, and he's curious about the place from the start. Eventually, on one of the aimless walks he takes around the neighborhood to distract himself from his hunger, he sneaks into what's called the backside of the track. That's the part across the track from the grandstands behind the backstretch. The racehorses are kept in long rows of stalls there, and sometimes there is rudimentary housing or trailers for the trainers and jockeys. I mentioned earlier that Portland Meadows was built in 1933. Now, if you were here for my wife Deborah Goldenberg's review of the book Seabiscuit in 2002, you'll remember that it was deep in the Great Depression around 1933 that horse racing was one of the most popular sports in the country. Every city of any size had a track, and millions of people across the country listened to races on the radio every week. Portland Meadows is a remnant of those times, sadly in decline. I'm going to show you a few photos taken at Portland Meadows. Most of these were taken by KPTV Channel 12 in Portland to illustrate a story about a woman named Lynn Takeda, a trainer at Portland Meadows, who died in August after being kicked in the head by a loose horse that was running around the backside. The photos are used with permission from KPTV. This first one is Portland Meadows from the front, the parking lot where patrons enter. You can see the front door there at the lower left. The second one is Willy Vlautin on the right, not a very good picture of him, on the other side of that same building. From here you can watch the action on the track, or you can watch from inside behind that big bank of windows behind Willy there. 3, and this is the back side where trainers and jockeys and others who work at the track spend their time there. You can see a row of mobile homes, sheds, and garages on the right, and some other sheds and outbuildings on the left. 4. Some more outbuildings and equipment on the back side. It's pretty run down, as you can see. 5. Willy uses a certain amount of racing and related terminology in the book. One of the terms that comes up a lot is hot walker. This is a couple of hot walkers. It's basically a little merry-go-round that you hook the horses up to and have them walk in circles to cool down after a race. 6. And this one, from the Oregonian's website, is of the stalls where horses like Pete spend most of their time. Again, pretty run down, and it's pretty well described by Vlautin in Charlie's words a little later on. 7, and this is Willy, on the left with a reporter from the Portland Mercury, a weekly alternative paper. He's showing the reporter how to read the racing form, which gives information about the horses that are running on any given day and how they have done in previous races. Willy Vlautin loves horse racing and spends a lot of time at Portland Meadows. In fact, he claims that he does most of his riding there. When I spoke to him before his October concert in Portland, he said he was really bummed that he was going to miss the opening of the race meet, which was coming up in a few days. Richmond Fontaine was scheduled for a tour of the UK and Europe, where they're quite a bit more popular than they are in the States. It is at Portland Meadows that Charlie meets Del Montgomery, a foul, profane, hard-drinking, tobacco-spitting, tight-fisted, and mostly unsuccessful horse trainer. Del owns a few long-shot horses, including Lean on Pete. Charlie goes to work for Del, even though the old guy doesn't pay very much, and sometimes forgets to, but it's better than sitting at home with an empty refrigerator. And Charlie's fascinated by the horses, although at first he's frightened by them. His first job is to accompany Del with 2 horses up the Columbia Gorge to an informal race meet on the Washington side. He meets Pete as they're loading the horses into a trailer. We went past a couple of buildings, and then Del parked and we got out and walked down a long shed-row barn where dozens and dozens of horses stood waiting in stalls. The whole building looked like it was leaning to the right. It was dilapidated. The paint was cracked and faded, and there was mud everywhere. The stalls themselves were brick on 3 sides. The brick was painted white, but covered in dust and mud. The gates that held the horses in were metal, and most were bent and rusty. A single naked light bulb hung in the center of each stall. There was hardly any natural light shining through at all. It seemed like a prison, a foreign prison in an old movie. There were maybe 50 horses waiting in that single row, and Dell said there were 20 to 25 more rows that had just as many. He said there were almost 1,000 horses there. He came to the end of the row and stopped. "These two," he said, and pointed at 2 horses that were in stalls next to each other. He opened the gate and went inside and put a halter on the first horse and let him out. "This is Tumbling Through," he said. "He's a biter. If he goes for you, just hit him on the nose and he'll quit." He handed me the lead rope and told me to walk him down the row and wait for him by the truck. "And don't let him stop on you. If he wants to stop, just give him a quick pull. And watch your feet. Don't let him step on you. And if he tries to pull away from you, give a hard pull on the rope and he'll stop. And remember, he'll bite the hell out of you. And don't let go, okay?" I nodded and took the rope, and Dell disappeared into another stall. I wrapped the rope around my hand and started going, but the whole thing made me uneasy. Tumbling Through was huge and dark brown in color. I let him out all right and stood there by the horse trailer, and I tried my best to keep him from dragging me around. He didn't try to bite me, though. 5 minutes later, Dell came out with another horse. "Never wrap the rope around your hand unless you want to lose your hand." He spit on the ground. I nodded and unwrapped the rope. "This is Lean on Pete." The horse was black, with a small white mark on his face. Dell led him to where I was standing and took Tumbling Through from me and told me how to unlock the trailer door, and I did. Then I held Tumbling Through while he loaded Lean on Pete. Pete went in easy and calm, but Tumbling Through took a long time to load, and you could tell he was nervous. So Charlie drives with Dell up the gorge to this informal race meet, which is run by a rancher named Estrada. Dell's other horse, Tumbling Through, loses his race, and pretty soon it's Pete's turn. There were 2 other races before Lean on Pete's, and both were really exciting. When the last one ended, I went back to the barn to find Tumbling Through gone and Dell in the other stall with Lean on Pete. He was holding Pete by his upper lip and twisting it. He put a handful of tablets underneath Pete's tongue and tied the tongue down. Pete started pacing around after that. He couldn't stand still. I followed them out, and the same jockey who rode Tumbling Through put a saddle on Pete. The whole time Pete got worse with the jitters. Dell helped the jockey up, and the same 2 men came and led the 2 horses down toward the start. Dell walked over to where Estrada was and spoke to him, then took money out of his wallet and counted it and gave it to a bald-headed man who was standing with them. Estrada did the same, and they shook hands. Then Dell went to the fence, leaned against it, and waited. When the race went off, I could see Lean on Pete pulling away. His head pushed forward and his ears pinned back, and the jockey was yelling at him and hitting him over and over with the whip. There was a great sound to it, the hooves on the dirt, the whips hitting the horses, and the group of men leaning against the fence yelling. I couldn't believe the jockeys could stay on when the horses were going as fast as they were. Pete led the other horse by 20 feet and pulled farther and farther ahead. It was like he had wheels, like his feet were barely touching the ground. It was the greatest thing I'd ever seen, and when it was over, Pete had won. I looked over, and I could see Dell smiling as Pete coasted down. The jockey brought Pete back, and Dell put a lead rope on him, and we led him off the track into the parking lot. Pete was breathing heavy, and he was dark with sweat. The jockey jumped down, took off his saddle, and Dell and I walked Pete toward the barn. "Pete's really fast," I said excitedly. "If he didn't beat that piece of shit, I would have slit his throat," Dell said. "He ain't fast. The other horse is just a pig. We'll hose him down, then we'll get the hell out of here before the spicks get drunk and want their money back." But Dell's voice was lighter and easier. You could tell he was happy. We took Lean on Pete to a concrete pad where there was a garden hose. Dell turned it on and sprayed Pete down. Then he told me to walk him up the road a half-mile or so to cool him off. "If he tries to get away, just give him a snap on the rope. Pete ain't much of a fighter." I nodded. "After that, feed him," he said. "What does he eat?" "2 flakes." "Of what?" "You don't know shit, do you?" "No," I said. "There's hay in the barn. You've seen a bale of hay, haven't you?" "I guess." A flake is maybe 5 inches off one of them. You'll see it. It comes off like a slice of cheese. Ask one of the spicks down there if you get confused. And look, don't run off anywhere. The second this last race is done, we're loading Pete and getting the fuck out of here. What about tumbling through? He bowed a tendon on that race, Dell said, and coughed. I sold him. I got too many fucked up horses as it is. Is he in a lot of pain? That's not my problem anymore, Dell said. That's Charlie's introduction to horse racing. Dell wins a big bet on another race, gets drunk, and gives Charlie a wad of money, which Charlie promptly takes home and buys himself groceries with, and things settle into something of a routine, with Charlie helping at the track during the days and returning to an empty house most nights. His dad comes home and takes him shopping a time or two and introduces him to the woman he's hanging around with. But then the woman's burly Samoan boyfriend shows up in the middle of the night, kicks down the door, and severely beats up Charlie's dad, who is taken to the hospital. Charlie visits him there a time or two, but his dad goes from bad to worse, and Charlie has to go on another racing trip with Dell to make some grocery money. People are starting to ask him questions, so he stops visiting his dad and starts surreptitiously living at the track, because he knows that if the authorities find him, he'll be put in foster care. I don't want to give too many spoilers in case some of you who haven't read the book want to read it in the future, but I will say that Charlie's dad doesn't get any better. Charlie takes to spending more and more time with Pete, grooming and petting him and pouring out his troubles to him. Pete has troubles of his own. Dell is working him too hard and too often, and his times are getting slower and slower. Charlie meets someone else who is living in a tack room at the track, a woman named Bonnie who is a former jockey. She befriends him in a way, but doesn't get at all emotionally involved with him, in the same way that she has learned to not get emotionally involved with the horses she takes care of. Charlie goes to see her one morning with his concerns about Pete. We walked over to Dell's stalls, and she went in and looked at Pete. She bent down and ran her hands up and down his legs. There's a lot of heat. Is that bad? It's not good. She told me to put a halter on him. What time does Dell get here? He'll be here in an hour or so, I told her. Now let's put him on the hot walker right now, she said, and let him out. She stood back and watched him. He's sore, all right. Just look at the way he walks. How old is he? 5, I think. How often has Dell been racing him? 5 weeks in a row. I'm not sure before that. She just stood there. Will he be all right? I don't know. If Dell keeps racing him all the time, he won't be. Dell says he thinks he might be navicular. That's bad if that's the case, she said. What's going to happen to him? It depends, she said. Quarter horses are pretty tough. They can take a lot more than thoroughbreds. But look, Charlie, don't worry too much about one horse, okay? You can't think of these guys as pets. They aren't. They're here for racing, not for anything else. If they lose too much, they get fired. When I had horses as a kid, we had winter pastures and summer pastures. We wouldn't even begin breaking them until they were 4. These guys get broke and rode hard at 2 and are stuck in a stall for 23 hours a day for months at a time. You can make a nice horse fucked up as hell in no time at all. So be careful, all right? It seems like Pete's in prison. I guess that's what I'd call being stuck in a cell for 23 hours a day, then taken out and run and put right back. The thing that gets me is that there's over 1,000 horses here, and not one of them is good enough to race at a real track like Santa Anita. What happens if he keeps losing? Dell will sell him to whoever will buy him. Maybe he'll get claimed, but don't think about that, she said and smiled. It was the first time I'd really seen her smile. Her teeth were brown and they were crooked, but she had a nice smile. What if no one wants him? You mean if he really is navicular? I nodded. Nothing good, Charlie. There used to be a slaughterhouse outside of Salem. Most of the horses went there, but they've outlawed slaughtering horses in the U.S., so now they ship them down in stock trailers to Mexico and kill them there. They ship them to Mexico and kill them? Don't think about it, Bonnie said, and put her hand on my shoulder. One night, Bonnie takes Charlie to a party in somebody else's house where Charlie doesn't know anybody and more or less abandons him there. A couple hours passed, and I didn't know what to do because I still hadn't seen Bonnie. A few times I went outside to make sure her car was still there, and it always was. Finally, I went from room to room and knocked on the doors. No one answered any of them, so I began opening them and looking inside. I found her. She looked asleep, sitting on the bed with her back resting against the wall. She didn't have her shirt on. There was a naked man next to her who had a needle going into his arm. He looked up at me, so I shut the door. I went back out to the party and left. I didn't know where I was. I walked down one street, and then another, and then I was running. The thoughts in my head were swirling. I'd seen a lot of things. I'd seen my dad do things. I'd seen him having sex with women. I'd seen him bending women over our couch and ramming into them, and I'd seen them in the kitchen sitting on top of him, saying things to him. I'd seen him puking his guts out in the sink and snorting cocaine and smoking weed. I saw a woman passed out in the back of our car in nothing but a bra. I saw her pee on the seat. I saw a guy get a broken beer bottle pushed in his face while we were at a daytime barbecue. I'd seen my dad hit my aunt in the face and call her names when all she did was tell him to come back when he wasn't so drunk and mean. I'd seen him wreck her car and then abandon it. I'd seen him talk to the police. I saw a kid get hit so hard that he began to foam at the mouth and go into seizures, and I'd seen a kid shoot a dog in the head with a .22. I'd seen another kid tear the pajamas off his sister just so he could see her down there. She was screaming and crying. And I'd seen Dell punch a horse as hard as he could, and I'd seen a horse break his leg and wobble around on three while the broke one was held on by only skin. I kept running and running until I was so tired I couldn't think about anything like that. It took a long time. It always takes a long time, but it always works. So, with the threat of the slaughterhouse for Pete and his own increasingly desperate situation in mind, one day Charlie loads Pete into the trailer, hijacks Dell's pickup, and hits the road. Their path takes them across the middle of Oregon, out to Prineville and Burns, then farther east toward Idaho. Charlie is hoping to get to Wyoming, which is the last place he knew of where his aunt lived. Just how he'll get there and what he'll do when he gets there, well, like most 15-year-olds, he hasn't thought things out that far. Along the way, he runs into some people who are nice and some who help him, some who exploit him, some who ignore him, and some who want to help him, but only on their own terms, not on his. One of the people he meets is named Santiago, later on in the book. It's when Charlie is working for a landscaping business where Santiago also works. And Santiago invites him home to dinner one night after he realizes that Charlie's homeless. It took me nearly an hour to walk to Santiago's house. It was a small brick home set off from the sidewalk. It had a front yard with grass. There were 2 kids playing on it, and there was an old man sitting in a chair watching them. I went to him and asked him if Santiago lived there. I don't think he understood what I was saying. Then one of the kids ran into the house and came out with Santiago. He was dressed in tan pants and a white button-down short-sleeved shirt. He wore a baseball hat and flip-flops. "I didn't think you would come," he said. I walked up to him and handed him the box of donuts. "What are these for?" "For your family," I said. He laughed at that, and we went inside. I met his wife, Nuria, and her brother, Carlos. Their house was nice. It had pictures of their family on the walls, and it smelled good, and they had music playing on a stereo. We sat around for a while, then we all went into the backyard where there was a picnic table that had a white cloth over it. We sat there and ate carnitas and homemade tortillas. They spoke in Mexican, and the kids laughed, and Santiago smiled and said things that made them laugh harder. His wife sat across from him, and she was young and good-looking. When dinner was over, I helped clear the plates, and his wife did the dishes. Everyone else stayed outside except Santiago, who I saw in the living room lighting a candle in front of a picture on the mantel. "It's my mother," he told me. "She left us 5 years ago. Every Friday I light a candle for her to let her know that I miss her and that I have work and that I'm okay." The picture was old and in black and white, and the woman in it was young and wearing a dress and a hat. She was leaning against a car. Was she nice? She was my mother. Of course she was nice. I didn't say anything. I just stood there with him. Then one of the kids came and asked him to come back outside, and so we did. The box of donuts were sitting on a plate in the center of the table. "You don't have to eat those if you don't want," I told them, and I was embarrassed. He laughed. "I like donuts. My kids like donuts." "I'm going to go now," I said. "You're not going to have one?" "I eat them every day," I said, and put out my hand. He shook it, and I said goodbye to his family, and he walked me out. When I left there, I was pretty down. I never understand why seeing something nice can get you so down, but it can. Lean on Pete was the recipient of 2 awards in the Oregon Book Awards judging this year for books published in 2010, a new People's Choice Award, and the top fiction honor, the Ken Kesey Award for Fiction. It was reviewed favorably in the Northwest media, including the Oregonian and Willamette Week, and also in national and international media, such as the New York Times Review of Books, where it was an editor's pick, Time Out Chicago, and the Independent and the Telegraph in London. It received a mixed review from Jane Smiley, writing for London's The Guardian newspaper. She finds Vlautin's vision of the current state of American society nihilistic, saying Vlautin offers no analysis of the world Charlie lives in, and therefore no hope of anything better. But I'm not sure I agree with Smiley. One of the main points of the book is that it is from Charlie's viewpoint, which is immature and non-judgmental. It's true that he doesn't overtly analyze and comment on his adventures, at least not to the reader. But it is clear to me that from the shame he feels and acknowledges in several places toward the end of the book, that Charlie is contemplating his own actions. Because Charlie does resort to violence a couple of times on his journey. And then there's the fact that he stole a horse, a pickup, and a trailer, and he steals gas and food and other things along the way, and breaks into a house or two. But he only does so when the stakes are high, when he feels that his own survival is at stake, or when he has been betrayed. There's a question and answer section in the back of the book where Vlautin talks about writing Lean on Pete. One of the things he says is that although he has spent a lot of time at the races, he really only knows a very little about that world. That's why he chose to tell the story from the point of view of a 15-year-old boy who also doesn't know much about horse racing. I think that was a wise choice for a writer, and says a lot about Vlautin's growing maturity as a novelist. Charlie Thompson is a very memorable and likable character. His relationship with Pete both propels the novel forward and gives us a window into Charlie's thoughts. The horse, of course, is a blank slate, because he can't tell us what he is thinking or feeling, and he's a perfect foil for Charlie, who spends a lot of time unburdening himself on the patient and stoic Pete. Last month, Vlautin told me Charlie is one of his favorite characters. "I love Charlie Thompson," he said. "Charlie got me out of bed for a whole winter." We were underneath the stage where a rock band was playing, so it was hard to catch every word, but in effect he said that he was feeling pretty low that winter. But then I'd think, well, Charlie had it tough, but he got up. I thought that was pretty interesting, to be motivated by a fictional character of your own creation. But you often hear novelists talk about their characters as though they have lives of their own. Someone whose opinions about literature I respect very much said she doesn't find Charlie's decision to take the horse and flee to be very realistic. I'm of two minds about that. On the one hand, it does seem an unlikely thing to do, at least from an adult's perspective. On the other hand, Charlie is desperate and has nothing tying him to his present life, and he feels that both he and Pete, his only friend in the world, are threatened and have nothing to lose. Under those circumstances, a kid who has seen what Charlie has seen just might make such an impetuous decision on the spur of the moment. And then I also thought about some of my friends when I was growing up, and I think that some of them, if they got mad enough or felt threatened enough, would have been perfectly capable of pulling such a damn fool stunt. So I don't agree that the storyline is unrealistic. Whether a real kid would get as far as Charlie does get is another question. It's a plot device, of course. Having a youngster doing outlandish things is a storytelling trope that goes back through Huckleberry Finn to Oliver Twist and probably farther back, and it's one that most readers seem to accept willingly. I mentioned that I'd lived in Lakeview, which is in southeastern Oregon, about 100 miles south of where Charlie crosses through central Oregon. It's ranching country, and in fact most of my relatives there are ranchers. I haven't been around horse racing people very much, but I've been around a lot of cowboys and other residents of the high desert for much of my life. I also worked in newspapers for a dozen years, and I covered a lot of crime and its aftermath in the court systems. Working for the Albany Democrat-Herald in the late 1980s and early 90s, when the meth trade and its associated violence was first taking hold, I was a second-hand witness to a lot of sordid behavior. And working for the Oregon Department of Human Services for the past 20 years, I've learned a lot about the kinds of ways that negligent or just plain bad parents can damage kids. I mention all that because it seems to me that Willy Vlautin in Lean on Pete got a lot of that stuff right. The way people on the high desert talk, the way people on the fringes live with their casual disregard for their own health and for many of the rules that govern society, but also the way they can all turn around and give the shirt off their back to a friend or share their last sandwich with a total stranger who is worse off. The way it feels to be picked up when you're hitchhiking by some old guy who's crazy as a loon. The way the actions of a kid can look like nothing but a string of crimes to someone on the outside, but it's really just that kid trying to take care of himself the only way he knows how. I think Willy Vlautin got a lot of that stuff right, which is why Lean on Pete is such a good and true book.